Hi there, very good morning. Welcome to another online RE lesson. Today we are going to look at the second part of our study on Buddhism. So last lesson we looked at what Buddhists believe is the answer to one of the biggest questions in life: how can I be happy? Today we are going to go back to looking at the person who started Buddhism, a man called Siddhartha Gautama. Now he is known as the Buddha, but before he became the Buddha, he was a prince and he lived a life of luxury. So we are going to look at his early life, his upbringing, and the events in his life up till around he was 29, 30 years old. Today's objectives are that by the end of this lesson, we hope to be able to describe what sort of upbringing Siddhartha Gautama had, to be able to explain why Siddhartha left the palace that he was brought up in, and to be able to describe the impact of what we call the four sights and the impact that they had on Siddhartha. So without further ado, let's crack on. The first thing I'd like you to do is I would like you to split your whole page into 8 boxes. Now you can decide whether you do this portrait or landscape. I do not mind. Make your decision and then use a ruler and a pencil to split your whole page evenly into 8 even boxes. Once you've done that, can you please number the boxes 1 to 8. Now pause this video so you can do that and then come back when you're finished. And as we go through this story of Siddhartha, I want you to summarize each part of the story in each of the boxes. So each slide will tell you which box you are going to be using at each point. So it should be really clear. And what you need to do is summarize each part of the story using pictures and words as much as you possibly can. Okay, so I want you to pick the key words to put in the boxes and then fill it with pictures and colours as well to try and tell the story of Siddhartha. So box number 1 actually starts before Siddhartha was born. So before he was born, his mother, who was called Queen Maya, had a dream. Now this dream was really fascinating, and she knew, and the king knew, that it was so interesting that it had to be interpreted. It must have meant something. And it was interpreted by local Brahmins, which are holy men. Now you will have remembered Brahmins from Hinduism, and these people are involved in this story because Siddhartha was born in a place which was then northern India. Okay, it's now called Nepal, but back then it was part of India. And so the Brahmins were the same individuals that we were talking about in the Hinduism course, were the people that came to interpret this dream for Queen Maya. And the Brahmins told the king and the queen that their son would either grow up to become a great ruler, a great king, or a great holy man. Okay, and it was one of the 2 options, and this was the prophecy that was kind of put over Siddhartha before he was even born. He was either going to be a king or a holy man. So that's box 1. Could you pause the video? Could you include some of this information, some of these icons in box 1, and then move on when you're ready to box 2. So box 2 is now Siddhartha as a young man. So his father did not want his son to become a holy man, as the prophecy suggested. So in order to make sure that the prince became the king, his father brought him up with the finest luxuries and the best education, so that he'd never want for anything. So Siddhartha's father decided that in order to make sure his son became king, he would protect him from all of the nasty things in life, and he would make sure that Siddhartha only lived a life of pleasure. So he had amazing food, he had all the luxuries, the finest clothes, the finest jewelry. He lived a life void of suffering, so that in order to not want for anything, he would stay within the walls of the palace and he would grow up to become king. So if you can pause the video at this point and fill in box number 2. However, aged about 29 years old, Siddhartha decided that he wanted to view the world as it really was. So one day he asked his servant called Channa to take him outside the palace so he could see what life was really like. Now he was doing this obviously against the wishes of his father, but as a 29-year-old man he decided that it was time for him to see life in its reality. So leaving the palace is box 3. Could you pause the video and fill in pictures and words in box number 3. Boxes 4 to 7 are all going to be about the 4 sights, and I'm going to break them down one by one for you. In these 4 sights, Prince Siddhartha sees life as it really is. And what he sees really is the one thing that he has not yet encountered at any point in his life, and that is suffering. Life involves suffering. If you do not suffer, you are not human. But Siddhartha has not at this point seen any suffering because his father has protected him from it. So he is going to see for the very first time, age 29, people suffering. And you can imagine if you'd spent 29 years not even realizing that suffering existed, it might be really traumatic if you see it for the first time. So these 4 sights were quite a traumatic experience for Siddhartha, but often the experiences in our lives which are most traumatic are also the ones which are most formative, the ones which kind of make us the person that we are today. So this is a massive turning point in Siddhartha's life and in how he views the world. So we're going to go on to box number 4. Box 4 is his first sight, and that is old age. So as he is out with Channa, riding around the local area, the prince sees a man who is bent over with old age. And this is the first time that Siddhartha has ever seen an elderly person. And he is so surprised by this and he wants to find out more. He asks Channa about it, and Channa explains to him that everyone must age. Aging is simply a part of life. But Siddhartha was saddened. He was made sad at the idea that age destroys the memory and the beauty of the human body. So this is his first experience of aging and suffering that goes with aging. So if you can pause the video, fill in box number 4, and then come back when you're ready. Box 5 is the second sight, and this second sight was sickness. Having seen a man bent over with age, he then sees a man suffering horrific pain at the hands of a disease. And again, Prince Siddhartha is shocked. He has not seen anyone in his life who has been sick or ill or diseased. And it is said in Buddhist legend that he is said to have trembled like the reflection of the moon on rippling water. And if you've ever seen a lake or a pond at night time and the water's rippling, the moon is dancing all over the place, this is a kind of metaphor to suggest that he was so vividly shocked that his body was shaking. And again, it's the first time he's ever seen anyone who is ill. So he's questioning Channa about this, and Channa is explaining to him that sickness is a part of life. It's something that many people go through, and one of the things that is, again, defining us as human beings. So again, if you can pause the video, go to box 5, fill in the information with pictures and words about the second sight. Box number 6 is the third sight, and this sight is death. And this is probably the most distressing of all sights for Siddhartha, because up to this point, he's never seen anyone in his life die. So he's been seeing things which everyone experiences, illness and old age, and he's been seeing things what are an inescapable part of life, and that is suffering. Everyone's life has suffering in it. But he was so filled with dismay at seeing the sight of a funeral procession, at seeing the sight of a dead body being carried down the road, that he began to lose all sense of hope. And he began to wonder if there was ever any chance that anyone could be happy, if ultimately everything in life will one day end. Because up to this point, Siddhartha has been used to endless luxuries. But what he's seeing in reality is that none of us have anything forever. Ultimately, everything will one day end. And that thought crushed him, and he was filled with dismay. So again, box number 6, could you pause the video and fill in the information and use some pictures to describe at this point where Siddhartha is mentally at this point in the story. Okay, so box number 7 is the 4th sight, and this is the final sight that Siddhartha has on his journey outside the palace. And this one is really interesting because having given up all hope after seeing old age, sickness and death for the first time in his life, Siddhartha is wondering if there can ever be peace for a troubled mind. And he goes out into the forest on his horse, hoping to find some kind of answer, some kind of peace of mind. And there he finds what's called an ascetic. Now, an ascetic is a holy man who has given up all possessions and is living a life of simplicity and self-denial. And in this picture you can see the ascetic, and he is sitting cross-legged on the tree stump. He is thin, he is wearing rags, he does not look in any way as rich and wealthy as the prince does, in contrast. And the ascetic tells the prince that he gave up his home, he gave up his possessions, and he gave up his family in order to search for an answer to all the suffering and unhappiness of this world. And then, having said that, the ascetic disappears before Siddhartha's eyes. So this was his 4th and final sight, and one which is really formative in what happens next. So if you can write down summaries of what happens in this sight in box number 7, remember to include pictures and key terms and summarize that in box 7. Box number 8 is known as the Great Departure. So having seen the 4 sights, having seen old age, sickness, death, and finally the ascetic, Siddhartha decided that he needed to leave his life as a prince. He needed to wave goodbye to the luxury and the ease of this life and go in search of an answer to a question which many of us struggle with. And that question is this: how do we deal with suffering in the world? Because he's realized that suffering is a part of life. We can't get away from it. We can't live a life without it, but we can deal with it. And that is what he wants to find the answer to. He's not asking how can we stop suffering, he's asking how can we deal with suffering. He goes back to the palace for one last time to look at his family, and then he sets off for the forest. When he gets to the forest, he removes his jewellery, his weapons and his expensive clothes, and he puts on simple robes and shaves his hair. And then the next chapter in his life is about to begin. That's box 8. If you can summarise it with pictures and words, that would be fantastic. And then I would like you to send me a message on Share My Homework with what you think will happen next to Siddhartha Gautama. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.